together. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Okay, so let's start with just orienting ourselves to where we are in liturgical time. So we have Shavuot, the feast of the wheat harvest coming up, and also traditionally the anniversary of the giving of Torah on Mount Sinai. It's coming up and starting on Saturday night. And traditionally you pull an all-nighter and study Torah texts into the wee hours of the morning. So you can reenact your college years, and you do that all in the kind of excitement and build up to the great giving of the Torah. The other thing is that there is this counting of the Omer between Passover, Pesach, and Shavuos, and we are in the 48th day of that, 48th evening of that. And it's 49 days total, 7 weeks. That's why Shavuot is the Feast of Weeks. And then on the 50th day, we have Shavuot. So tonight is the 48th night, and there is this tradition that the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics have of counting the Omer in accordance with 7 attributes of the sort of human soul that you want to try to perfect during the course of the Omer. And in that Kabbalistic counting, we are, this is the week of Shekhinah, or Malchut, of the divine dwelling within us. And for each of the days of the week, there's another attribute that it combines with, and this one is Yesod Shebeshekhinah, which is the foundation of Shekhinah. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is about and how to think about the foundation of the divine in our lives. So I don't know if anyone is going to be studying with Rabbi Pensner on Saturday, but you're doing a little bit of that mass infusion of Torah if you're doing tonight and Saturday. You're getting a double dose this week, so that's good. It's in the spirit of the holiday. So I would like to start, as I do, with an opening question, and this is the question: have you ever received what you would describe as a calling? And if so, did it have a sound? And if it had a sound, what was that like? Yes, Annette.
I'm not sure what you mean by a calling. I have had times in my life where I've felt compelled to do things, but I've never heard like an external voice. It's more been an internal voice or something inside me that says, and it's more of an emotional thing, because sometimes my intellect says, don't go there. But my emotional side says, this is something I have to do no matter what my mind says.
Well, this is wonderful.
I don't know if that's a calling or what that is.
I think that counts. I think it's wonderful because I think the voice can be internal. And I also love that you describe it as something that tugs at the emotions and not necessarily the intellect, because certainly there are various different ways in which we are moved. So I think that's perfect. Anyone else? It can be a time when you feel that the divine or something divine has communicated with you. Yes, Fallon.
I was watching the eclipse a few weeks back, and I was just as I was looking up at the sky as the shadow crossed the moon, I was just struck with, I don't know, awe and just how like truly amazing that moment was, that all of the coincidences that had to have occurred for, I don't know, this planet to be created, and then the different stages that it went through as it became habitable for different forms of life, and that we are eventually one of those types of life that evolved and were able to understand the seasons and calculate the movement of the stars and planets and moon in the sky, and to understand what it is that is happening during an eclipse. It just felt, yeah, divine,
Mm,
magical. I'm not sure it was really a calling exactly, but it was just the realization of the magnitude of everything going on around me.
yes, yeah, I love that example, and it calls to mind something that I've discussed with in an earlier group. Brene Brown has recently come out with this book, Atlas of the Heart, and she distinguishes between awe and wonder, where wonder is something that maybe makes you want to delve a little bit more into the subject and maybe read more about eclipses. But awe is something that makes you feel kind of small in the face of this magnitude. I think you used that word, of this kind of larger significance that surrounds you, that you are sort of just a small part of, and you feel swept away by. So I love that notion of being surrounded by that natural phenomenon that inspired you. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you for sharing those instances. And we're going to talk a little bit about hearing a call and having that sense of the divine around you. And if you can see the texts here, what I wanted to start with were some texts from the giving of the Torah. And the first one is from Exodus, and this is right before the 10 Commandments are given. And Ruth, would you like to read that first section in English, Exodus 19:16 through 19?
Sure. On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud upon the mountains and a very loud blast of the horn. And all the people who were in the camp trembled. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for Adonai had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The blare of the horn grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder.
Okay. And then this next sentence, God spoke all these words, saying, and that's the lead-in sentence to the 10 Commandments. And then Rashi interprets that, saying this statement that God spoke all these words tells us that God said all of these words in one utterance, something that is impossible for a human being to do. So that the entire 10 Commandments just came rushing out in one roaring word. Then it continues on at the end of the 10 Commandments. So in chapter 20, there's 14 verses that have the 10 Commandments. Judy, do you want to read Exodus 20:15?
All the people were seeing the sounds of thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance.
So what's the weird phrase there that you see that stands out to you, that speaks of something extraordinary?
But they saw the sounds.
Yeah, they saw the sounds. And Rashi jumps on that. They saw the sounds. They saw that which should be heard, something which is impossible to see on any other occasion. And then he comments, they stood far off. There's a midrash. They moved back, startled, 12 miles, a distance equal to the length of their camp, and ministering angels came and assisted them to bring them back. So what's the message? What's being conveyed by these texts with regard to that experience of the revelation of the 10 Commandments on the Mount? Yeah, Ruth.
I want to say that it feels like it was so frightening that the people had to quickly back away, that maybe they didn't understand what was happening, that they somehow saw these sounds and it was all around them, like thunder and lightning can be around us. But maybe they saw something in that and were just pushed back,
Yeah, so something overwhelming and frightening
overwhelming.
that just sort of made them draw back. Annette.
But it also makes me think of, I don't know whether this is the right word, but there's something called synesthesia,
Yes.
where people see, I don't know whether they see sounds, but they like hear colors, and
Yes,
there's like a confusion of the senses in
correct.
synesthesia. And it is awesome to think about what that would be like for somebody.
Yeah.
And that feels like what's happening here.
It's almost hallucinatory and must be extremely
Mhm.
disorienting, right? I think it's a
Mhm.
perfect use of the word synesthesia, having the senses cross in that way. Thank you. Annette.
I was going to say what Ruth just said. I was going to say, basically, it was all encompassing and the senses got confused. So your whole being is involved in it in a very encompassing and terrifying way that can't be sorted out.
Right. So definitely extraordinary, frightening, disorienting. Any other thoughts before we move on to another text? I feel like that's very much the sense of it. All right, so this next set of texts, interestingly, I think Rabbi Pensner is going to be talking about them the same way. I'll just give a very brief introduction and then we'll read it. So this is from Kings, and it's from the story of Elijah. And there's this drought that goes on for 3 years in the land. This is under King Ahab, who is not a good king. And I think during Ahab's reign, there was a cult of worship for this god Baal. And Elijah creates this confrontation with the priests of Baal. And they set up 2 altars on a mountaintop, and the priests of Baal get one of the altars, and Elijah gets another altar. And he tells the priests of Baal to dig a trench around their altar and fill it with water. And then he says, go and invoke your God to sort of come down with fire to burn this sacrifice. And so the priests of Baal, are wailing and cutting themselves and just going through their orgiastic rituals, and nothing is happening. And Elijah starts to mock them and says, really, is that all you got? And they continue into the night and nothing happens. And then Elijah takes over and he prays to God and the God of Abraham, and he invokes the patriarchs, and this fire comes down from the sky and consumes his sacrifice and then burns up the other sacrifice, including the trench of water. And then Elijah says to the people of Israel who were summoned to witness this, to slaughter the priests of Baal. And so they all get slaughtered. And King Ahab, who's shown up through this, orders Elijah to be put to death. Elijah Eliyahu flees to Mount Sinai. And in Kings 19, 9 through 12, he prays to God on Mount Sinai. And so, Fallon, I'm not sure if you've read yet. Would you mind reading 19, 9 through 12?
Then the word of the Lord came to him. He said to him, "Why are you here, Elijah?" He replied, "I am moved by zeal for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they are out to take my life. Come out," he called, "and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And lo, the Lord passed by. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by the power of the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a soft murmuring sound.
Thank you. So here's where we're at, right? Elijah comes back to Mount Sinai and is looking to kind of re-experience a connection with God. And this is what he gets. So what do you make of the difference between the revelation on Mount Sinai to all the people of Israel, and then several hundred years later, still in the biblical period, a prophet is seeking to have an encounter with God, and it's very different? What do you make of that difference?
The revelation at Sinai, they saw the thunder and lightning, and there was the blast of horns and everything. It was just a lot. And I mean, in here, there's wind that splits mountains and shatters rocks, and an earthquake and a fire, but the Lord isn't in any of these. And then it ends with a soft murmuring sound instead. So I guess maybe the beginning of each experience is pretty similar, but how it concludes is very different, and how the presence of the Lord is like ultimately experienced is very different between the two. And I mean, the revelation at Sinai was also like millions of people experiencing it, and this is just one person. I don't know if that
Yeah,
makes the difference, but
well, I think actually there's two things there that I really appreciate. Just to go to the last one first, that it's a very personal one person's experience. But going back to the beginning, and also your notion of the eclipse and the kind of the sense of awesomeness, the encounter with God here at the end, which is not synesthesia and one word, and it's sort of a soft murmuring sound. It's a much more subtle and less overwhelming experience. It's not a kind of suffusing experience that knocks you back 12 miles. It's much softer. And to me, it's very interesting that even, within a period where, Eliyahu is like, Eliyahu Navi, like he's like a major character in the Bible, and he's the herald of the Messianic era. But even Eliyahu does not get to experience God on Mount Sinai in the same degree as the initial revelation, which to me is I don't know, it's a little surprising, but it's also a little closer to what we need to experience, right? The way we experience this whole notion of calling. And Annette, the way you described sort of the subtlety of the voice is much closer to the soft murmuring sound than synesthesia. And I guess the other point that I'd make here that is interesting. So you have this period, right? The 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot. And Pesach is a holiday where there is a commandment to reenact. I mean, that's the whole point, right, of the Seder, that you're supposed to consider yourself as if you left Egypt. But there's no reenactment that's called for on Shavuot. And based on the texts that we've read, in what way does that make sense? Why do you think that we're not called upon to reenact and put ourselves in on Mount Sinai? Yes, Fallon.
Maybe,
Go ahead.
maybe because Pesach is reenacting something that happened before Revelation, and Shavuot is as Revelation is being received. So they're just two very different uh, states of being for the Israelites. Two very different ways of knowing life and the world pre and post Revelation.
It's interesting. I mean, go ahead. I like where you were going with the notion of two different states of being, but Annette, go ahead.
Well, presumably we were all there at Sinai.
Well, that's interesting. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the concept of having been, well, but I mean, do you feel when you read this, been there, done that? I mean, I guess we all were theoretically at Sinai, and we need to think about that and unpack what that means. But I guess the way I'm thinking about it is to imagine yourself in a place of oppression and slavery is definitely a leap of the imagination. There's no two ways about that. But in order to experience Sinai, I think you have to, take some psychedelic and move to kind of another level of consciousness. And Fallon, that's where I appreciate your reference to another state. And it is definitely a leap of the imagination to try to figure out what slavery felt like. And I think some people might even view it as an, inappropriate appropriation. But this is an altered state of being, and I'm not sure how you get there. And maybe it's not a reenactment, but as one rabbi I read said, it's an enactment, that it's more about your actions to be in the place of Eliyahu, to be able to hear the small voice, as opposed to experience this wondrous event that knocked you 12 miles back.
I feel like the lack of sleep, the staying up to study text all night, in a way, like goes towards reaching an altered state. Like sleep deprivation can have a really big effect on you. So maybe that's sort of I mean,
Yes.
yeah, it's not really a reenactment because it's not exactly what happened. It's not enacting exactly what happened, but it's going through something to reach a similar-ish
Yeah.
state of mind.
I love that idea. No, that's definitely great. A little sleep deprivation to get you to an altered state. That's great. Thank you. Any other thoughts before we move on? Yes, Annette.
Maybe it's more important to reenact where we came from as slaves and as people who had nothing, and remember that, than it is to remember what happened at Sinai. To keep our humility and to remember how to treat other people and to not get too proud.
I love that idea, and it's certainly, sorry, the notion of remembering where you came from and the empathy that gives you for people who don't have the privilege that you have now, et cetera. The memory and the reenactment there makes sense. Stepping back in time to Revelation to then feel inspiration now, you almost have to go to now to find your inspiration, right? And that's again that enactment versus reenactment. So I agree in that. That's a really good way of putting it. The act of memory is really powerful when it comes to the Passover paradigm in a way that Shavuot and Revelation way back when, doesn't speak to me the same way. I like that. I want to go to one other thing, and Annette, you're giving us a good segue here to we were all at Sinai. So there's a biblical verse that is interpreted to this point that we were all at Sinai. And Judy, do you want to read 29:13 to 14?
Okay. I make this covenant with its sanctions, not with you alone, but both with those who are standing here with us this day before our God Adonai, and with those who are not with us here this day.
Well, of course, the rabbis are all over this. What do you mean those who are not here with us this day, right? That's a statement that they take to mean future generations who are not there. And then, and that's this language here from the Talmud. And Annette, if you want to read, I'm going to just skip here from the phrase in Shavuot 39a. You want to read there?
From the phrase, but with he who stands here with us this day, I have derived only that those who stood at Mount Sinai were included in this covenant. From where do I derive that the subsequent generations and the converts who will convert in the future were also included? The verse states, and also with he who is not here with us this day.
Okay, so what is the significance there of this concept that, let's say, this group on this call stood at Mount Sinai? Because we clearly didn't. What do you make of that midrash that says that we all stood at Mount Sinai? Yeah, Annette, go ahead.
I've always taken that to mean not so much that we all experience the thunder and the lightning and the drama, but that we're all obligated by the pact at Mount Sinai, and that we're all generationally tied. And I've always liked that I'm part of a long line of people, no matter the diasporas, no matter what's happened, that goes back to that moment in terms of important moral standards that are in many ways the essence of Judaism, the essence of all the rabbinic interpretations, the essence of how we continue to redefine the moral structures by which we live as Jews.
So there's a lot packed into what you just said. There's definitely the continuity of the chain. I want to sort of stick a pin, as they say, in this concept of redefine, because I think we'll come back to that. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. You used the word obligation, and I'm wondering if there is a sense of this that we were all at Mount Sinai, because obviously they use the word covenant that may make you think of obligation. But is there another sense of it that's not about obligation, but that we might have might be all present at Sinai in a different way? Yes, Fallon.
Well, if the revelation is something that was kind of trippy, like experiencing it as an altered form of consciousness, then the idea that we're all there, that's not something that could really work or be experienced outside of an altered state of consciousness. Like, it's not like, I don't know, time travel was invented and we literally all were standing there physically, but like yeah, like in a mystical sort of sense, like just in the way that revelation was received mystically, so too is it a fact of that mysticism that we all experienced it, everyone who was there and all the Jews that would be in the world from that point on.
So, I mean, I love what you're saying, but I want to seize upon the time travel point. I guess there isn't anything about that. I mean, the fact that we are sitting around the virtual table here discussing these issues means that we are, in effect, getting the benefit of what was given at Sinai, right? And if you remove the bounds of time, then we are present at Sinai, because Sinai is ever present. So I read it that way, that and there's a midrash that talks about, and this is going a little bit, Annette, to the point you were making about obligation. There was more packed into your comment, but the midrash is that there were 3 elements to the revelation at Sinai. There was fire, there was water, and there was desert. And the point of it being that all 3 of these things are available to everybody. And it's the availability of revelation through the transmission of written Torah and oral Torah across time that creates this availability and virtual presence, which we can all understand in the Zoom era, at Sinai. And so I guess I posit that that's a way to think about future generations having been present, because we can access it. I think one other point, and then I want to be able to get us to the texts that I said we would discuss in the summary of this. So in the interest of truth and advertising, I should probably get to those. There's the statement from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. And this is understood to be the oral Torah. And so there's this whole, in addition to all of us stood at Sinai, the tradition is that not only the written Torah, but every interpretation of the Torah ever to be interpreted was revealed at Sinai. And, you know, in a sense, I don't know if it's ever happened to you that you've thought about a particular verse and come to an interpretation of the verse only to find that some rabbi 1,000 years ago did that already. That happens to me all the time. And I used to feel, you know, I want to, you know, come up with something original. But for me, and then it's a little bit back to your point of the tradition and the generations, to be able to have found a nugget that someone 1,000 years ago found, I feel pretty good. I'm in good company if I can find that. That makes me feel good. But maybe the guy or woman 1,000 years ago also discovered something that one of the people from the Talmud discovered 1,000 years before. I mean, it's really more about the process of our trying to discover for ourselves and our connection, as opposed to having a star or a new species named after us. It's really that process of discovery and learning that to me is exciting about this. All right, so I'm going to shift to, I thought it was very interesting to find out that there are 4 instances. So this is in the realm of hearing the call. There are 4 instances in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, where God calls out to people, and the nature of the call is repeating their name. And so I just want to review the 4 of them, and they're interesting because think about who's getting called to, what's their state of mind, if God is meeting them where they are, going to the point I think, Annette, you made about it can be an emotional thing, not necessarily a rational thing. So, what's going on? There are some subtleties in the text that we'll point out. So, Ruth, why don't we start this is a slightly longer passage, but so this is Jacob finally finds out that Joseph is alive. Thought he was dead. He's alive. He's the ruler in Egypt. The brothers come back to tell him. And so here's what happens. So Ruth, do you want to read it for us?
Yeah. And they told him, Joseph is alive. Yes, he is ruler over the whole land of Egypt. His heart went numb, for he did not believe them. But when they recounted all that Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to transport him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Enough, said Israel. My son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die. So Israel set out with all that was his, and he came to Beersheba, where he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac's house. God called to Israel in a vision by night, Jacob, Jacob. He answered, Here. He answers Hineni. I am God, the God of your father's house. Fear not to go down to Egypt, for I will make you there into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will also bring you back, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes.
Thank you. Okay, so, and I'm just circling the Yaakov, Jacob, Vayomer Hineni. He said, here I am. Translated here, but it's really here I am. So, well, what do you think this tone of Jacob, there's exclamation points there? I don't know if you agree with that. What do you think God's tone is in calling out to Jacob?
I think
Yes,
in this
Ruth.
case, it's inviting. He's saying, come on, get up. I'm going to go with you. Don't be afraid. I'm going to help you. He professes to stand by Jacob's side, is the way I read it.
Inviting, encouraging,
Yeah.
maybe comforting a little bit. I mean, what's Jacob's state of mind at this time, do you think?
I think he's excited and relieved. He just found out his son is is still alive.
Right.
He must be excited.
Anything else that might be going on in his mind? Yes, Annette.
I think he's excited, but I think he's probably also, just trying to put myself in his shoes, apprehensive about what he's going to find. The family didn't part on the best of terms. It's been a long time since they've seen each other. He's an old man, and he wants to die knowing that there's peace in the family. And so this must bring up all kinds of confusing emotions for him.
Yep. Yep, well, there's probably some fear and he needs some comfort. There's another element to it. What's the prophecy of what's supposed to happen to the Israelites? Yes, Fallon.
That they will become a great nation and that Adonai will go down with them to Egypt and then also bring them back out of Egypt.
Yeah, but let's not forget the 400 years of slavery that's supposed to intervene, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is, and by, there's probably a couple of 100 years have already elapsed. I mean, the count is a little bit complicated, but there's certainly a long enslavement that's they are about to face. And so some comfort's necessary on that to say, we're going to get you out of there, Jacob. Okay, so I think you have unpacked that well. And the one thing I want to also point out to you is, you see that little vertical line, Yaakov, Yaakov? That vertical line is a pause. We're going to come back to it, but I just want you to note that pause. And maybe we could stop here to just sort of say, why might there be a pause? Which might indicate it wasn't Jacob, Jacob, but that it was Jacob, Jacob.
Oh, could God be waiting for him to react?
That makes sense, Ruth, right? So here's the next one. This is the book of Samuel. And Samuel, the story here, right? His mother, Hannah, prayed for a child and promised that if she had a child, that she would dedicate him to the service of God. She ends up having the child after praying, and Samuel has been dedicated to service in the temple. And young Samuel uses the word hanar, which is sort of adolescent. So figure he's about 14, 15. He's a young temple acolyte. So I'll just read it quickly. Young Samuel was in the service of the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. Prophecy was not widespread. One day, Eli was asleep in his usual place. His eyes had begun to fail, and he could barely see. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was sleeping in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. The Lord called out to Samuel, and he answered, "I'm coming." He ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." But Eli replied, "I didn't call you. Go back to sleep." So he went back and lay down. Again, the Lord called Samuel. Samuel rose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." But he replied, "I didn't call, my son. Go back to sleep." Now Samuel had not yet experienced the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he rose and said to Eli, "Here I am, you called me." Then Eli understood that the Lord was calling the boy. And Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down. If you are called again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" And Samuel went to his place and lay down. The Lord came and stood there, and he called as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel answered, "Speak, for your servant is listening." So he comes back with the formula. I'm just going to circle it. You see again, Shmuel, Shmuel, Samuel, Samuel. There's that line. And the response from Shmuel had to be fed to him, right, by Eli. He's 14. He hasn't experienced God yet. And you certainly could understand why God needs to repeat here, Shmuel, Shmuel, because this is kind of a first time. But going back up here, Jacob has had lots of encounters. He wrestled with an angel, saw the dream of the angels going up and down the ladder, and but it's interesting that even Jacob, there is kind of this pause there. But when Jacob hears it, his response is immediate to say, "Here I am." So now let's go to another one. This is a very famous one, right? Judy, do you want to read this one? 22, 9 to 11?
Okay. They arrived at the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood, and Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. Then a messenger of Adonai called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, and he answered, Here I am.
Thank you. Same formula as with Jacob. Same line between Avraham, same answer, Hineni. So what's the tone here that you think God was calling with? Fallon.
More frantic. Like he wants to make sure he's heard before Isaac is killed.
Totally, right? The knife, it's like up here, right? And on this one, the exclamation points, I think you could see. And that is frantic. It's like stop him before he consummates this horrible act. Now, can someone argue for a different interpretation? Yes, Judy.
Well, I was just thinking that the pause between the two names could be a blessing.
Ah. And what would that, I love that idea. What would the blessing be about, Judy, do you think?
A blessing for action, or a blessing for following God's word.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And there are, in the realm of, saying something that, a rabbi 1,000 years ago said, there are rabbinic interpretations of this that say this was out of love. Rashi says it was out of love, because this was a test of Abraham, and Abraham passed the test of following God's command. Again, we have the vertical line. So let's go the last one. Let's see, Fallon. I'm losing track of who's read. So go ahead, Fallon, if you don't mind reading Exodus 3:2-4.
A messenger of Adonai appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? When Adonai saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush. Moses, Moses, he answered. Here I am.
All right, so again, repeating the name, Vayomer Hineni, 3 of these 4 places have, but what's the big difference?
Yeah, there's no line,
There's no line.
no separation.
So what does that mean? Yes, Annette.
God isn't waiting for a response or a reaction in between calling the person.
And is that a statement about God or Moses?
Both.
Well, so
So
what do
a
you mean?
statement about their relationship.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. I think this is a statement about Moses's attunement and their connection. And Moses was at the ready. And Moses kind of knew exactly what was going on. And further, and this is at least for Ruth, but anyone else who reads Trope, if you take a look at the symbols below here, Moshe Vayomer Hineni is a single melodic phrase. Mercha Tipcha, Mercha Sof Pasuk. This is read in a single flow with no interruption, consistent with this. When you go to Avraham Vayomer Hineni, Avraham ends with the etnachta, and then a new phrase begins, Vayomer Hineni. So God speaks, and yet another musical pause before God responds. Same thing here, Shmuel, Shmuel ends with that little wishbone thing there at the bottom. And then Shmuel responds, and then same thing here, Yaakov, Yaakov, same wishbone over there. So in a very subtle way, or maybe not so subtle, the text is communicating that there's an immediacy to Moses's attunement and connection that the other three instances do not have. The thing that I wanted to mention is someone once told me, and I don't know if it's true, that there was a Russian acting exam. You know, the method acting teachers like Stanislavski and those folks all came out of Russia. And the Russian acting exam was to say the phrase good night 25 different ways. So I've always loved that. So this is repeat somebody's name. But I think that in that vein, you know, if you think about the state of mind of the four people that were in receipt of this message, and if the divine is speaking to them in a place where they're at, so there can be reaction and hearing. You know, you could imagine that there was a very different tone, and of course the text is so spare. It's sort of like a musical score that you have to bring your own interpretation to. I wanted, in the vein of this notion of the still small voice, this is Michael Strassfeld, wonderful rabbi, has something here from a commentator, the Degel Machane Ephraim. I'm not sure when this was written. I'm guessing probably 19th century. And so, Annette, would you like to read How Are We to Hear the Voice of Sinai?
Sure. How are we to hear the voice of Sinai? One possibility is suggested by the puzzling verse describing the experience at Sinai, and all the people saw the sounds. What does it mean that the people saw rather than heard the sounds? Imagine a person who can't hear entering a room filled with music and dancing people. At first, it might seem that the dancers were crazy. Yet, with some awareness, even that person can realize that the people are dancing to music. Do you want me to go on?
Yes, please.
It might be said that we are all deaf when it comes to the voice of Sinai. The first step is to realize that the music is playing. That is, that God is calling us. Looking at the world that way, we can at least see the effects of that voice in such things as nature and acts of loving kindness. Perhaps by seeing the sounds, we may eventually come to hear them too. Isn't that beautiful?
Isn't that lovely?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll tell you a funny thing.
that's great.
A friend of mine was having a sort of a party at her house over Memorial Day weekend. And she found out about this kind of electronic disco thing where people, I don't know if you've heard of this, I had never heard of it. People have earphones on that are tuned to sort of a Bluetooth frequency. And there are three different soundtracks playing for three different kinds of dances. Nobody can tell what anyone is listening to. And all you get to see as you're dancing to your music is people dancing to other music. And so there's like three different strains of things going on. It's supposed to be quite entertaining. But anyway, it's a little bit of a modern day example of this. So the other thing I just wanted to point out with regard to this thing of the distant echo, I don't know if anyone has a background in astronomy, cosmology. I took a couple of courses when I was an undergrad. There's something called the cosmic microwave background. I'll just read this. In Big Bang, the Big Bang, everybody knows about the Big Bang, right? Supposedly the universe like came out of an explosion out of nothing, which actually, you know, let there be light. I mean, it definitely has echoes in Genesis. In Big Bang cosmology, this is the electromagnetic radiation, which is a remnant from an early stage of the universe, also known as the relic radiation. The CMB is a faint cosmic background radiation filling all space. It's an important source of data on the early universe because it is the oldest electromagnetic radiation in the universe, dating back to the epoch of recombination, which is the explosion and then things starting to coalesce into stars. With a traditional optical telescope, the space between stars and galaxies is completely dark. However, a sufficiently sensitive radio telescope shows a faint background noise or glow, almost isotropic, meaning same in every direction, that's not associated with any star, galaxy, or other object. This glow is strongest in the microwave region of the radio spectrum. The actual accidental discovery of the CMB in 1965, sorry for that siren, that's the distant noise, by American radio astronomers Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson was the culmination of work initiated in the 40s and earned the discoverers the 1978 Nobel Prize in Physics. I just love this notion of this faint echo, right? This is the still small voice. It actually exists, which is totally nuts. What I'd like to do kind of in closing, and that looks like we'll definitely land the plane on time here. I want to go back to the 48th day of the Omer. And this is, remember, it was foundation of Shekhinah, right, of the presence of God in our lives. And it's sort of going back to, I think, Annette, you made the point about how maybe, our interpretations, be the connection to generations and interpretations sort of shifting over time. And you think about what is, the best foundation for changing circumstance. And I think about the kind of foundation they build to earthquake-proof a building. And that's a flexible foundation, right? It's not a fixed, the more rigid the foundation, the more likely it is that in a ground shift, everything's going to crack. And so to me, the concept of flexibility and adapting Torah to our changing times and circumstances and needs is really the heart of being able to invite divine presence into our lives. What I'd like to do is take a second to count the Omer, because we have the opportunity. We're together tonight, and it's almost last dance, last chance for romance here. Let's do it. Let me share again. All right, so this is the Hebrew, this is the transliteration, and the first blessing is, you've commanded us to count the Omer, and then we'll have the count of today is 48 days, 6 weeks, 6 days. So we need to stand. You're obligated to stand for the counting of the Omer. All right.
Obligated to stand.
Obligated. Yeah, now we're obligated. Work those glutes. All right. Here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sefirat haomer. And then we'll go here. Hayom shmona v'arba'im yom shehem shisha shvuot v'shisha yamim la'omer. Today is 48 days, which is 6 weeks and 6 days of the Omer. All right, you can sit. And I guess I'll just want to sort of close again, just to sort of remind and say that this holiday that we have coming up recalls revelation that we will never be able to experience in its full power, but it's faint echoes that we can hear in our lives. We see faint glimpses when the veil is pulled aside and we glimpse something transcendent. And we can infer and imagine the power of the first revelation to all the people at Sinai and strive to achieve its power. It's left out there as a vision, a mythic event to serve as inspiration. But in fact, this revelation is available to us at all times when we open a book of Torah. It's a soft murmuring, a glow in the background. And so may we be able to be attuned to its sound, however faint it may be all these generations later, and continue to derive comfort and strength from its words. Ken Yehi Ratzon and Chag Sameach.
And here it's on. Rich, that was excellent job. Thank you for leading us.
Yeah. Oh, you're
That was
welcome.
lovely, Rich.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you. Thanks for.
That's, you kept me awake and alert.
Yeah.
It's really an accomplishment, Rich.
All right. Go for Saturday night. Your jet lag should be gone by then.
So I have one argument for the Shmuel and Moshe.
Yeah.
You know, this is sort of a time travel twist. So we're interpreting, I mean, your interpretation of having the line or not having the line is based on rabbis interpreting how we define the passages in the Torah, and somebody way back when put in those lines and put in the trope.
Yeah.
And, you know, I liked your interpretation, but it's also sort of a twist because somebody else decided this.
Yeah. You know, it's
See
interesting.
my problem? You see the
I do. I
the
do.
horse and cart problem.
Yeah. So it's getting at, you know, what's the origin of those things, and do we already have the editor who's
Right.
imposing
Right.
their interpretation?
Right. But I
Yeah.
did like your interpretation.
Well, I appreciate that. And it does make me wonder, it's a historical matter, when did these things all come in?
Right. Right.
I want to find that out. And,
Okay.
yeah. But that's great. Thank you for, you know, adding an air of mystery here at the end. Mystery editor. Anyway, well, I'm really happy that you all could join. It was a nice, intimate group. I appreciate all the contributions, and
Yeah.
I wish you a great holiday.
All right. Thank you.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.